Greetings, programs. Welcome to TCoffeeAndCode, a developer's guide to security. We're going to be talking about security in all its forms today. This is our coffee shop conversation with developers about topics of interest to developers. We're going to discuss today ideas and principles. So some of it probably be fairly high level. Some of it may get into the details. But we're going to just focus on writing secure code, what you're creating, making sure it's secure, protecting your data, whether it's movement or at rest, securing your interactions with your development platform, and keeping your deploying secure as well. Do want to have a disclaimer though. The idea is we're having, think of this as a coffee shop conversation. All right. I have my beverage here, my big mug of water. Yeah. Hopefully you have a beverage too. If not, that's fine. Oh, Chuck's got his, that's a good sized mug.
Anyway, get one of the Mystics mugs.
So don't take what we're giving you, saying here as legally advice, right? We're going to make some generalizations. We're going to share our opinions. There are opinions. We're not going to agree with each other, and we're probably going to argue about things. And it's all going to change. By the time this is over, everything we said is outdated anyway. All right. So this is an important topic, though. That's why we wanted to have a disclaimer, and also why we want to discuss it. Do some additional research and come to your own conclusions. Do look at finding an expert in the area, which may be, I mean, I haven't introduced everybody yet, but you know, if somebody here is available for consulting and you hire them, that's a different relationship than just what we're sharing here today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Ian, I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself since you can say who you are better than I can, but.
Depends on the time of day. My name is Ian Barker. I'm an Embarcadero MVP, and yes, I have had coffee, so I'm a bit more awake. I'm a software developer. I wake up every day and write code in Delphi, of course. I'm a writer and been a poet in the past and a few other things as well. Born in London, which is why I have a British accent, and I now live in Dallas, in Texas. And you can see what the other things are on the slide. I think that's up at the moment. So that's me.
Awesome. Zach Briggs.
Hi, I'm Zach Briggs. I'm an Embarcadero MVP. I am the Chief Development Officer for a company called Rapid Kinetics. We develop hardware and software solutions for clients, handle any kind of R&D that they need. I'm also co-host of the Delphi Mystics podcast, and you can usually find me floating around in either the Delphi Facebook groups or on slack.delphiworlds.com.
Awesome. And there's one person here you may not recognize as a friend of mine, Chuck. I'll let you introduce yourself, Chuck, real quick.
Hi, I'm Chuck, recovering software developer and security guy. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Part of what I wanted to do is make sure my goal is to include people beyond the usual suspects in these conversations so that you can get different points of view. But Chuck, as a cybersecurity specialist, I figure he's going to have a very different point of view. And actually, I will point this out. You're on your Starlink right now, aren't you, Chuck?
Yes, sir.
So
yes, sir,
Chuck is coming to us from space
via satellite.
Via satellite. Live via satellite.
Space.
We'll laugh if in the air like 3/4 of us have Starlink.
I should have had my Star Trek background. That would have been perfect.
Glenn Dufkey.
Hello, I'm Glenn Dufkey, also known as Glenn D for those who have troubles pronouncing my surname. I'm also an Embarcadero MVP and from Denmark. And what I primarily do in my one-man consulting company, I develop all kind of software and hardware solutions. And I also spend a lot of time helping out in the different Delphi forums and sharing a lot of my knowledge. So that's me.
Awesome. And this is me. I guess I have to introduce myself now since I made you guys introduce yourselves. I love software development. I'm a developer advocate. We
got to see your beautiful mugshot. There we go.
There we
Rock
go.
and roll.
So it's funny because I took forever to update all my pictures, bio pictures, when I had a beard. Because I had a beard for a few years. And then when I finally got it updated, and shortly after that, I shaved my beard off. And beards are in vogue now, so whatever. Yeah, that's me. You probably know who I am. I love talking about stuff. Security is something I'm actually really interested in. I've always been kind of passive interest in that. So this is kind of an exciting topic for me to talk about. But anyway, when I was brought up this topic, I didn't realize, but Chuck told me that April is National Supply Chain Integrity Month from the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency in the U.S. So that's makes this topical, I guess. Chuck, can you explain what exactly this means? Maybe you might have a better way of describing that than I do.
Well, CISA is a U.S. government organization. Most of their outward focus is on cyber defense. So it's a really good resource for learning more, understanding different standards and alerts. They've got some really good news groups email lists that you can follow that will tell you about alerts and other things happening that are topical, things to watch out for, and things to patch mostly. And they also have some other things that they have hooked up with, NSA and some of the other, 3-letter government agencies that go along with it. But this is really a good resource to consume what's affectionately called a blue team information or cyber defense information on how to protect your infrastructure.
So blue team versus red team? That's a reference to what was it? I was gonna make a joke and now I forgot the name of the joke. What's that game that's on Xbox with the
Halo?
Halo, yes. Halo is red team versus blue team. That's where the term comes from, probably, isn't it, Chuck? You know?
You know what? I'm not entirely sure. I do know that blue team's pretty much cyber defense, and the red team's the guys who are breaking into systems and then documenting how they got in to show vulnerabilities.
All right.
So and then there's also a term called purple team, which is where the two teams are combined. But usually it's kind of red versus blue, and it can have a very interesting dynamic.
So it's basically like for the force on force exercises.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Totally true. Yep. And then National Supply Chain Integrity Month is the government's part of the reaction to some of the solar wind stuff that's happened. That was in the news last year, and trying to secure the supply chain, not only physically, but also through technology providers and other applications, and basically trying to secure all the things, which is not a small task in itself. So it's a process.
Well, I think part of the thing that people don't remember is the number of moving parts, just the sheer number of moving parts involved. I mean, you have what's yours, but you have yours, mine, and ours. I mean, it's you have just numerous upon numerous attack surfaces that you have to defend against. So, sorry, go ahead.
No, actually,
totally.
That's a good point. And actually, so now let me go back to the slides. I was going to say, let's start a conversation. So I want this to be a conversation, but I do want to make one point real quick, is that please put your questions. There's a few questions already coming in here, and I will moderate these questions to the panel here. The idea behind this, we have a few slides of topics to discuss, but really the objective is to get answers to your questions. So put questions in the question panel, and I'll, like I said, field them to the panelists here so that they can answer them, and that will be really the primary flow of this session. But I do have a list here of some topics that we've put in here that we're open to discussing. Some things maybe, you could I didn't think about that, and you could ask us a question about that or whatever, but just to give you some inspiration, I guess. But I think Chuck had a slide here on supply chain risk. So let's discuss a little bit about that, because there was a really interesting thing that happened a few years back, if I remember correctly, where I think it was a Node.js package that somebody had written a single function that did like reversing a string or something really silly, trivial, that was used by all these libraries, and it all trickled together into like all these big libraries, and nobody was aware they were using this one little function that was coming from this one library that was no longer being maintained, and the library was taken offline because the developer was retiring and got tired of supporting it, even though it wasn't that complicated. And all of a sudden, the entire web broke. Does anyone remember this happening a few years back?
Vaguely.
That was the package left pad.
It's left pad. That's what it was. Which
Yeah.
is,
Yes.
it's like was such a trivial piece of code, really, but it was supply chain. It was, nobody realized. They're like, oh, I'm using this package from Google. Well, they didn't realize Google was using a package from this company, using a package from this organization, using these open source packages that all came back to this one left pad function that was out there. And it's just,
But it happens outside the IT world, and that's the thing. You know, every time you see a product recall where they say, oh, there's been a problem at one of the factories and some plastic may have gotten into the chicken. And so the following brands have got to be taken off the shelves or returned. And you suddenly realize that actually all these different grocery stores and all these different places, they pretty much sell the chicken from one place. I mean, you know, and you think, really, why do I pay so much for it? Oh, well, it's the way we coat it and the secret blend of spices and the rest of it. But it's exactly the same. You know, it's the same thing as that kind of, oh, some plastic got into the main down the stream factory, you know, in Midtown Texas or something like that, and all of a sudden the whole country have got to take all the chicken nuggets off the shelf. Well, that's exactly what happened with the left pad function. Chicken nuggets got taken off the shelf and everybody went, well, what am I going to eat? Yeah.
There was a open source plugin for WordPress a couple years back that was a great, I think it was a shopping cart or something like that, that a whole bunch of people used, and the developer that was doing it open source and kind of, you know, on his own, and then he sold it, and the folks that bought the plugin from him that was already installed and automatically updating went ahead, and the guys who bought it went ahead and put a bunch of malware in it. So it was causing all kinds of havoc throughout everybody who had installed this plugin through WordPress, and it was a change in reputation that wasn't published. It took like 2 or 3 months for people to figure out what was going on. So it's something to watch out for, not just for the developer, but also all the chain past you. It's your customers and your customers' auditors and everyone else trying to make sure that you secure the entire supply chain is a daunting task. With everything, with all the connectivity we have and the sharing we have, it's big.
I think that is a large part of what the problem is because we all, it's like if somebody were to exploit jQuery. jQuery is used by so many sites, and I think one of the difficulties that we as programmers of any kind, not just Delphi coders, one of the difficulties we face is when something like jQuery becomes compromised. It's not a small breach. I mean, they get into a lot of things with that. And so these middleware and framework products, they get attacked a lot. I mean, it's like they stuck a lightning rod out to get hit as soon as they get popularity of any kind, because if they can breach that middleware, they have access to everything through that middleware. And you know, that becomes a daunting task to stay on top of all the CVE postings, to, you know, not just keep the stuff up to date, but make sure that you're not updating to a compromised version, and then balance that between, because, you know, the middleware itself may not have realized that there was an issue because maybe they developed it on, you know, PHP 7.2 or, you know, an IIS 6 or, you know, something like that, but then some change gets introduced. And sometimes it's just a confluence that comes together that contributes to it. And it's kind of like hot potato. The person that's holding the potato the moment it gets noticed is the one that's blamed for the issue, you know. So
yeah,
I mean, we have a lot. Yeah, I mean, there's just tons of attack surface. I mean, there was a I don't remember. There was 2 instances that I know of with Delphi specifically. One of them was there was a virus that used to infect computers that would infect the resulting compiled binary.
Yeah, it used to infect. What it did was it patched up some of the library source code, if I remember correctly, and then it would inject that into your programs because you're compiling in the library source code. And then what had to happen was, I think it might have been Portland at the time, they now make it so that actually it validity checks those libraries. So if you ever try and like copy something in there, which you shouldn't be doing, but if you ever try and do that or try and patch that source code, you'll find that it'll complain and say, you can't do that. There's a problem with your install, and it tries to actually recover that situation. But yeah, it was a problem. Yeah, a big problem.
So there was another instance, and I know people love to. I think they assume that I say, hey, don't pirate Delphi. If you can't afford it, use CE or reach out to customer service, reach out to Jim McKeith, somebody. We will find a way to help you. You know, like if you really want to be part of this, you know, we're not going to say, oh no, the door's closed to you. The issue that I have with pirating is not related to Delphi specifically. It's not because Embarcadero is over there going, well, you're an MVP, so you have to be a role model. You can ask Jim, even before I was an MVP, and I fought being an MVP. But even before I was an MVP, I was kind of anti-piracy at that point. And the reason being, I, like many others, had sampled from that well over the years for a multitude of products. And I can tell you that the headache that it creates and the vulnerabilities that it causes, they aren't worth it. You know, I have lost, I don't know how many hours because I downloaded and opened a hand grenade on my workstation just because I was trying to avoid paying $150 for a piece of software. And
assume everything you grab that's pirated, assume it's infected.
Well, what else is their motivation? I mean, I'm not saying all cracks are infected, but there's a reason why they're putting the crack out there for you.
Exactly.
You know, they don't do it out of the goodness of their heart usually. They do it because they've installed something that silently, you know, makes itself available to them over time, or goes on a mission of sabotage. And you know, I've been inspecting various Delphi cracks. This has been a project I've been working on for like a couple of years now, where I'm I don't do this at home. Get approval if you're going to do this. But I'm very carefully in an isolated environment with the assistance of Embarcadero's people on, you know, taking these cracks and figuring out what makes them tick and trying to figure out what does this do. I have found keyloggers in Delphi cracks. I have found remote access kits in Delphi cracks, and they don't become apparent. Like I've tried it with a multitude of virus scanners installed. They a lot of times will not trip on the virus scanner.
Absolutely.
And then the next thing you know, you look at the packet stream and you realize that they're collecting information from your stuff. If you value your source code, and you know, if you come up with something brilliant, let's say you make the next 7-zip or the next MP3 or something, it'll be all over the internet in a heartbeat if you've been using a cracked copy, because the probability that somebody else is getting your source code as you're doing it is pretty high. And then you're also risking exposing your workplace, your clients, I mean, every element of the chain.
Absolutely. That is absolutely correct. And even when it's exfiltrating data, it can be hidden in other traffic too. So the days of it just connecting out to a website directly and you being able to catch it easily with Wireshark are rapidly coming to an end. There are folks passing telemetry back through checksums on DNS queries. So, you know,
well, I've seen it go as far as tagged on the end of an ICMP packet, which
there you go. Exactly.
You wouldn't think it would even be possible, but yeah, they managed to do it. And I have some extremely intelligent SEM solutions and IDS systems and stuff like that. And I've seen some of this stuff slip past them. And you're not talking about consumer grade hardware. I'm talking about Cisco hardware and, you know, SonicWall, Juniper, you know, handfuls of enterprise grade hardware. And I'm watching this thing just slip right past like nothing happened.
Exactly. So, exactly. It's an arms race and we're losing.
Yeah.
Blue team's completely losing on that.
It's always going to be an arms race. You can make it more difficult, and you can make it harder. But even today, with all these antivirus, I mean, there's a lot more antivirus software around. The operating systems are much more hardened than they used to be back in the day when, you know, there was early versions of Windows. Microsoft got burnt very badly, and they're like, "Hey, we'll lose our business if we get an image of being a haven for viruses," which it really was back in XP days. You know, it's a threat to their own business model, and so they've taken steps, which is why they pay bug bounties for finding zero-day exploits and things like that. But you know, just it's like everything. You know, if you invent an idiot-proof system, they'll invent a better kind of idiot. And it's
I installed one with a component once.
Yeah, and you know, just when you think you've solved one problem, actually solving that problem can create another problem that you thought was fixed. It's never ever going to be resolved. It's like trying to cure the common cold. Too many variations, too many people with reasons to do something about it, unfortunately.
Yep.
So how does somebody secure their supply chain? What is the best way? So obviously, if you're using software from an untrusted source, pirated software or whatever, that could be an issue. But even using open source software, there needs to have some sort of awareness of that, because there are examples like you mentioned, WordPress plugin. I've seen Google Chrome add-ins and Firefox add-ins do the same thing, that eventually they get sold off to somebody else. Or what's that?
AdBlock Plus.
Yeah, AdBlock Plus, that happened too. Yeah, I've had a few of them that have happened too, where I see it, I know it's good, but it gets auto updated, and then all of a sudden I start having weird behavior on my system, and I'm like, what's going on? And sure enough, it got compromised. So how do you go about securing your supply chain? What are some things you can do to secure your supply chain?
First thing is inventory. You got to know what you have before you can secure it. And that's a capital inventory instead of just an inventory. So everything, every plugin, every machine, every endpoint, you got to know it's there. You got that. If you're in an enterprise, if you have that little Windows 95 box in the corner that's running the elevator because you don't have $2 million to replace the elevator controller, yeah, that's a pain point. You know, let's make sure we take care of that. You know, put some epoxy in the USB 1.0 slot. You know, you know.
Actually, I've got a stick that blows them.
Exactly. You know, and inventory is key, and then do an assessment, figure out where you're at, what's your risk tolerance, and do some math. You can't afford to patch everything, you can't afford to fix everything, but at least know where your vulnerabilities are and where you're going to get hurt if there's an issue. And yeah, go ahead.
We have a problem that we get a lot of hardware from China, and I don't want to be specifically knocking any one country, because it could be the same for any country that suddenly decides to introduce some of their own, improve their own lot in the world, shall we say, by introducing some code that helps them rather than helps us. And you know, some of the suppliers are very, very small organizations, and there's a lot of government pressure put on them to ensure that if their product is widely adopted, then they're helping out their state, which I totally get. I understand that. We don't like it because, you know, we think that's wrong, but that's their perspective of how they want to secure their security, their national security, and further their causes. But we actually have that problem because, you know, we can get them manufactured elsewhere, but the reality is most of the devices that are available, that are hardware devices in the industry I work in, which is biometric security, biometric time and attendance, hand scanners, fingerprint scanners, face scanners, and there's even one where you put your palm up and it infrared scans the veins in your hand. They're very secure. And there's one where you put your hand in and it measures the bones of your hand, which also produces the biometric scanning. That is made in the EU, in the European Union, but that's the only one out of about 100 devices that I'm aware of that are not made in China. And so, you know, that BIOS that comes through is based on, most of these devices run a BIOS called BusyBox, which Glenn, being a Linux guy, will probably be able to say that BusyBox is a type of Linux. It's designed for embedded systems, but that means you can put files in it. And of course, they make it look like it's an unedited BusyBox, but it's not. because it's specifically working for their devices. I don't know what it's doing in 6 years' time. Maybe those devices will suddenly all talk to each other, and China will suddenly own the United States. You know? I don't know.
The Ubiquity devices.
Oh yeah.
I can gain root on a BusyBox Ubiquity device in about 10 seconds flat.
Oh gee.
Yeah, and nearly every network router has got the same problem, and this is it.
I love Ubiquity. They have some awesome products. I know they recently had a thing that comes down to what he's saying about inventory. But yeah, I absolutely love Ubiquity, but that particular thing really, like, I get why it's there, because it was developed so that IT people could do what they need to do with those boxes and don't feel hamstrung by Ubiquity. But at the same time, that disturbs me that I can gain root access in, like I said, 10 seconds flat.
Well, look at the Huawei 5G stuff. You know, nobody in the United States is allowed to actually, as far as I remember, I don't think it's changed, but they are banned from supplying equipment. And if you are a 5G provider, either a mobile device or a home broadband, which is the other thing, you cannot use Huawei equipment because they consider them to be under the thumb of the secret services of another nation, which happens to be China again. But the same could be true of Russia or anybody else that the West might consider in some kind of political conflict. And those are the countries we don't trust. I mean, we don't know that the British government aren't doing something where their devices. It's a problem. The supply chain. You've got to understand your devices, and if you don't, well, you take action in case the worst happens.
All right. There's a keyword here. It's called zero trust. Is a concept coming up here, and it's becoming more and more prevalent. It's kind of a last choice because it really breaks a lot of interoperability. But that is a methodology to go through your inventory and only allow access, hopefully, to what needs to communicate and where. You have to really understand your hardware and your systems and your communications and everything you have in place instead of just plug it in and it works. You got to know what and how that happens.
Well, in zero trust, I've been, and I will not claim to be an expert about zero trust. I have been trying to learn it. You're talking about a very deep topic, but part of zero trust. So we deploy hosting clusters for some hosting providers, and we have a SEM solution, which is a security information and event management system. And so it's collecting information. Oh, hey, did somebody try to access SSH? Did they belong accessing SSH? That SEM solution is tuned in a way that I flew from the US over to Indonesia. I logged in using SSL authentication to an SSH, and so I didn't fail any checks. And the moment I got in, I elevated myself to root, and the system immediately kicked me out. And it automatically notified the NOC and said, hey, something, you know. And the reason was because I wasn't coming from the IP address I normally come from. My behavior wasn't abnormal, and my authentication all checked out, but for the sake of security, it kicked me out. And it figured it was safer to kick me out and make the NOC center override it than it was to allow it to assume that I belonged there just because I had the codes.
Yep.
So,
yep, absolutely true.
Really quick, so, I think some people joined late and they were asking about what supply chain management is, and I tried to briefly explain it, but it's the entirety of your application platform. It is
all your code, everything. Yeah, your entire platform. Yeah.
The operating system, the hardware, the software, your firmware, your network you're riding on, any third-party stuff that you're bringing in. It is the entirety of it. So
coffee shop resident sitting next to you when you're on your laptop, airport Wi-Fi. You know, there's stories of, and again, they could be apocryphal, but there are stories of government agencies actually setting up Wi-Fi routers for, all you need to do is watch this video and you get free Wi-Fi. And you think, oh, fantastic. I'll have free Wi-Fi. Why not? You get 24 hours of free Wi-Fi. It looks like it may be Verizon or you know, Free or whoever those providers are, but actually no, it's somebody going, let's just see if he's a terrorist and, you know, filter through.
All right.
So
Sorry, I jutted us off. We were talking about zero trust.
Yep,
Take
no
it away.
worries. No worries. I think we should jump around a little bit because, you know, we've got only a couple hours here and there's so much to cover, so much to help with and answer and
we
stuff.
could do our own, we could do an entire like month-long series on these things. I mean, it's the depth of information available.
even the questions we're getting floods of questions. We're trying to answer.
I know, and I feel bad because like normally I try to answer like when somebody else is talking, I try to answer the questions the best I can, and they're piling up. The one thing I will say is from a development standpoint, there is a lot of money to be made in the zero trust industry right now. I've got a client right now, and this is not a new concept, so it's okay, and they're going to open source it anyway. But they're having me write a new Windows authentication system so that when you come up to your computer, it's not just the username, password, but it also supports the fingerprint, but it supports two-factor as well. So that when you're trying to log in, you scan your finger on the plate if you want to skip the password, but it's going to send a two-factor to your phone. And if you're logging in outside of your normal operational hours, it's also going to notify management immediately. So, and then your access is going to vary depending on whether you're somebody that's trusted to be there after hours. So, you know, if you're supposed to be there between 9 and 5 in your data entry, and now suddenly you're trying to log into the controller's computer at 8 p.m. at night, it's probably going to deny you altogether and alert security. So there's a lot of money to be made in the zero trust network and the zero trust compliance, we'll say, going forward.
The important thing about biometrics, sorry, Jim. The important thing about biometrics, by the way, is, and this is kind of my area of expertise, I suppose, but biometrics authenticate that you are you, not the thing that you've got, the pass or the tag or the password that you know or the phone that you're holding is you. It's authenticating you. So a combination of biometrics and second two-factor authentication. That's a very probably an almost unbreakable.
Something you have, something you are, and something you know.
Yep, exactly. I was going to say there's 3 factors. There's the password, which is something you know. Yep. The token, the token generator, something you have, right? Which used to be the keychain, RSA keychain things. Now it's the Google Authent app, and then something you are is your biology, your you just said the term. I can't think what it is now.
Biometric.
Biometric, yeah. But could there be I guess you could have a fourth one, right? You can have behavior, which goes back to like Zach was saying, right?
That's what we're moving toward.
Yeah.
Because VPNs get compromised these days, and just because you had VPN access doesn't mean that you should immediately be dumped into the network.
Yeah. So I was going to say this kind of dovetails into Brian's question here. It says one of the most used quotes in security is the end user is the biggest vulnerability. Because of this, I've seen a push to find means of authentication other than passwords. Are there any promising alternatives currently? So that the 2-factor or 3-factor or multi-factor zero trust is another alternative to that. There are a number of alternatives out there. Generally, so one thing, this is a pet peeve of mine. I use a password manager, and I try and use long, complicated passwords. It is stupid. I will use that word. How many websites I go to use a 30-character password? Like, oh, your password's too long. I'm like, what? Or, oh, you have illegal characters in your password.
You need 1 capital letter, 5 lowercase letters, and a number.
And that's it.
That's not a secure password, you fool.
Back in 08, I always had a laugh. I was trying to change my password, I think, in my Gmail or something, and it's like you got to have a symbol, you got to have a capital letter, a lowercase letter, just ridiculous. And I'm like, I go to get in my bank account. You can't have a symbol. You couldn't have. And I'm over here going, why is my email more secure than my bank account?
Yeah.
Well, I had one last year. I had one last year where I bought a piece of physical security equipment, and the vendor that I was working through, I went through the website to reset my password, and he emailed me in clear text my original password for his store.
Ouch.
Ooh,
Now,
yeah,
this is
that
supposed to be
happens a
a
lot.
physical security vendor. Needless to say, I changed it and did not purchase and blacklisted him from everyone I know. So that's not something you want to keep, right? And that kind of activity happens all the time, where a customer will expect a certain level of privacy or security, and you're going to lose a customer over it by making it easy for the customer.
Text messages, emails, those are not secure.
Yeah, it's
You
plain
can't
text.
you can't do that.
There was
Yeah.
I saw something the other day where someone had their password was mailed to them in
Yes.
mail, and they're like, "What the heck?" And they're like, and they called about it on social media. It was a bank, I think it was, and they're like, "It is a federal crime for people to tamper with your mail. Therefore, it is secure." And he's like, "Yeah, because people that are breaking into my account follow all the laws."
Right.
You know,
Right.
so
Now I could see mailing somebody a password if it's part of like a 2 or 3 FA
yes,
type system, so you can combine it where you get something physically in your customer's hand, and you combine it with an email, and you combine it with a token, to build up the trust you have that you're actually talking to that person instead of a dog on the internet.
I'm waiting for all of our passports have RFID tags on them now, and I'm waiting for that to be the recommended way to prove that you're over 18 or over 21, and you got to scan that to prove who you are.
That is not going to work. And the reason it won't work is because we have biometric devices. We come across, so many people that go, "Oh, you're not scanning my fingerprints," which of course is nonsense. The
Right.
devices don't scan your fingerprints like the
You leave
police
your
do. They don't
fingerprints
store
everywhere
them.
all the time.
Yeah, they don't store them like that. And if I wanted your fingerprints, I'd hand you a glass of water and then wait till you went and take them off. But the reason it's a problem is we had one customer, and I feel like I've told this story on TCoffeeAndCode before, but I'll tell it again. They contacted us and said, "We've got a problem with one of our members of staff. They refuse to use the biometric device because of their religious objections to it." I'm like, really? Okay, well, I'll go in and we'll talk to them. And this lady sat down. She was perfectly nice lady, perfectly reasonable, not jumping up and down like some people do. "Oh, I'm not signing in and clocking in." It was actually explained that she said, "I cannot do it because we believe that biometric identification, we're Seventh-day Adventists, and we believe that Satan puts the mark of the beast on people." That's her religious belief, and that's entirely her right to believe in that. And I said, "Well, okay, I understand where you're coming from. I can't question your faith and how you believe these things, but what happens with your driving license and your credit cards? Because that number is associated with you." And she said, "I can cut my credit cards up. I can choose not to use them." I said, "Okay, all right. But, the biometric passports were introduced in the UK several years ago, the United Kingdom. But this, at the time we were talking, they were coming in. They were going to become mandatory for people. You'd get a passport and it would become biometric." And she said, "I will keep my non-biometric passport and object." I said, "But it's the government. If they say it's going to be biometric, whether you like it or not." And she said, "Then I won't use my passport anymore. I will not travel." And I said, "Okay." So I looked up what her beliefs were, and I went to the manager and I said, "There is a way of her clocking in that uses a PIN number, and you can decide whether you trust her or not, but based on the fact that she has deeply held religious beliefs, which I believe to be genuine, and she quite rightly says that the biometric identification is something that is continually on her. She cannot get rid of that. She can't say, no, my biometric number will change, so it's not mark of the beast, because it's permanently associated with her. What can I do? I can't argue against that thing." So someone has got a religious objection to biometric identification on those grounds. I really don't know what people are going to do. And governments can make all the rules they like, but we all know what happens when you try and make a government adjudication. that overrules someone's religious beliefs. It isn't going to work, because faith is quite often stronger than legality. You know,
we have hospitals, like one of our clients produces EMR software for hospitals in emerging and developing countries, and so there's several sites all over Africa and Pakistan and various other places, and I was trying to find better ways for them to identify people, because they often don't have any identification. And so we considered a fingerprint, and they said the problem with that is a lot of people don't understand to put their finger on the plate, and they can't, in the case of women, they can't come over there and touch them to put their finger on the plate. And so, that becomes a problem. And then I'm thinking, okay, well, facial recognition. The problem there is I get this much of their face. And so there
is a palm scanner. They can hold their hand up like that. It's non-contact. And it scans the veins. It scans the veins of the hand. We sell it.
Can't take a picture of them though.
Scans of it. Well, actually, what happens is they hold the hand there, and it takes a photograph. There are 2 cameras.
Yeah.
And the camera is 3-dimensional. It puts a load of dots all over the person, so they can't hold up a photograph. They hold the hand up, and you naturally accidentally move around, so that they can't go, oh, here's a photograph of my hand. But what it does is it shines infrared through. When you've seen an infrared, one of these heat maps, it doesn't. It's not true color. It's weird colors. Well, as far as I understand, that's what it does. And the veins in your hand and up to here are unique. They're as unique as your fingerprint. And so they hold the hand up to the hand scanner. They go like that. It clocks them in. And it's non-contact, which is perfect in the days of COVID. And it also is biometric. It's completely individual. The chances of 2 hand vein patterns colliding, which obviously happens with most biometrics, there's a certain, they have a score, like a trust score. So you can set most situations where it's not secure, you can say, oh, I'll set it to medium.
Match probability, yeah.
Yeah. And I've had someone do a hand scanner before, and he demonstrated it to me. He was a sales guy. I put my hand in, and it recognized me as him, which annoyed him. But he'd set the recognition quality low just so that he could do his demos. And but the hand vein, that solves all that problem, because we have exactly the same problem. We have people turn up and they wear high risk clothing, protective clothing, because they work in a bacon factory or they work with nuts or something like that. So they have a hair net that goes over here. They have a face mask that goes over here. They wear rubber gloves quite often, and they can use a hand scan with the rubber gloves. So it crops up, not just because they're wearing face veils, for all sorts of situational reasons.
It's a probability of match. So in the event that they had sliced a vein. Well, first off, they'd have to cut themselves pretty heavily to slice a vein to that point. Typically speaking, most people will. Most biometric systems involve multiple inputs. So, like when I scan for fingerprints to use those, it's usually all 5 fingerprints and maybe my thumb on my other hand. That kind of thing. Things do happen. People, but that's more of a business process problem. If I show up to work after losing both hands, that's going to be between me and HR. I'm going to guess I'm going to have bigger problems at that point.
It's also about, it depends on the situation. If you have someone who's a bricklayer and you're using fingerprint scanners, their fingerprints will change over time. And people that pick pineapples contain a bromelain, which is a chemical that actually dissolves your fingerprints. So the best criminals in the world are people that pick pineapples because they've got no fingerprints.
We had a banker that was at the aerospace company when I implemented fingerprints, and she had retired from being a banker, but all the time of going through the money, her fingerprints wouldn't scan on our scanners. So sorry, we digress. We need to pull up.
Yeah. So I think Glenn out of this slide here, but just some, or maybe it was Chuck. Anyway, there are a few topics I think would be useful. Just make sure we touch on each of these. The ideas of storage secrets, or secret storage, secret management, and secure communications, and then also regulatory compliance. So that's a big deal. Someone commented here actually about Why doesn't Delphi include strong encryption out of the box? And someone else mentioned that there used to be laws about exporting encryption. There still are.
Yeah, there still are. Apple asks you when you submit your apps.
They are different and they are evolving, but if you want to export encryption, you have to, from the US to other countries, you have to get permission to export certain types of encryption. And for certain types of encryption, you have to be very careful that it doesn't go to certain countries, because there's certain countries that are prohibited from getting encryption. Not that they don't have it, but you cannot allow it to happen to them get it from you. And so once you start getting into that space, it is rather complicated. And even if you're like, oh, but I'm only using the encryption provided by the OS, unfortunately, that linking exception does not.
What happens if you work remotely, you're writing the software and it's on a server outside the United States that's got the encryption? At what point is it becoming an export if you're never actually in the UK, the US? That's a bit of an interesting question, because nowadays with these virtual machines and things like that, you could be anywhere. Your machine could actually be hosted in Iran or somewhere like that might have difficulties with importing encryption. I wonder how that works.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
Go on, CIA, do your best. I've got a way around it. Don't worry.
Jim,
yes, if I go to jail in the next 2 weeks, please bring me food.
What was that, Chuck? Go back to which one?
Go back to that slide real quick. And do you mind if I talk a little bit about each one of those on there?
Sure.
And then
Yeah, please do.
I think Glenn's got some really good points that he had on another slide that ties into, especially in the secret storage and management piece. So let me kind of put on my futurist hat for a minute and this is what I see happening at the enterprise level. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is to get developers ready for the next phase and the next set of things that the market's going to be needing and wanting. And then I'm hoping Glenn can tie this in with some detail on the different pieces and how to do it and that kind of bit. First off, secret storage is a huge audit issue right now, especially on third party. When an auditor comes in and assessing a service that I'm working on, the auditor is asking, how are you managing your secrets, right? Is your data encrypted at rest? Could be one of the questions. Is it encrypted in transit, which is the secure communications piece? One of the questions I think I saw fly by here, I don't have a real good handle on the QA stuff, is a self-signed versus a CA signed SSL cert. The biggest difference between the two is good and better. Okay, good, you have an SSL that's self-signed, at least the traffic is obfuscated. It's not clear text anymore, going back and forth between your two systems. But you still are vulnerable to a man-in-the-middle attack, meaning somebody else can impersonate a machine and drop another cert in between the two. And they can watch what you're doing, but it's a little bit more effort. Having an actual assigned certificate from a CA means you trust the certificate authority and it says this is the right machine you're talking to. You're not going to be impersonating, or you have some assurance that you're talking to the right machine when you actually do your transactions. So it's good and better, right? Auditors are now looking really close at the better. They're saying, why are you using self-signed? And they're really picking on people, your customers. They're picking on your customers for not having a real certificate in there. That's on communications. On the secret storage and management, I'm seeing things, especially with the GDPR in Europe, depending on what level of information you have, it's already assumed that everything's stored encrypted at rest. And there's operating system ways to encrypt your data at rest in the OS. And that's kind of like your base. But now they're starting to get into things like key rotation, auditing, and tracing, where your data per customer, per field in the database needs to have a separate key for encryption. They also want keys rotated every 3 months. So it's not you just hit the transaction and change it when you hit the transaction coming in and out. There are now requests for data to be re-encrypted every 3 months. And there are actually products out there that do that for you. So as a developer, you can grab either an open source or a commercial product that use an API to be a secrets management or a secret storage engine for you. So you don't have to stay on top of that treadmill. If somebody looks in your SQL database, your fields are all the same and the encryption matches your field types. So if you got a varchar, or if you have a number field and that kind of stuff, there are applications out there that will translate all that for you automatically. So you call the REST API to your secret engine and it calls the database and pulls it back out and then hands you the decrypted text and creates a lot of log file that can be audited that'll tell who got the information at what time. And it also manages the re-encryption and key tracking to re-encrypt all that data ahead of time. That's what's coming. I'm actually seeing several customers who are doing that today. So the idea is to kind of keep an eye on secret storage and management, get used to it, figure out what it is. But on the regulatory compliance side, read up ahead of time. And if you can say your application is compatible with this regulatory standard, and because it does these kind of transactions and it supports this kind of encryption and it does this kind of stuff, it will give you a competitive advantage going forward. And nothing happens unless you record it in a log file that it happened, right? You have to show that it's doing it. And going along with some of the zero trust, just because the application vendor says my application is secure, auditors are now coming in and saying, show me what the log files are, show me what the audit files are, show me what you're doing with this. So at a high level, I'm trying to get like that total piece there. And Glenn, can you address some of the pieces in here and show some of the do's and don'ts? I think would be a really good segue into that.
Yeah, that's the next slide, please.
There you go.
Yeah. I put in here a slide here, which I have called Mind Your Design, and this is basically a non-exhaustive list. There is a lot of things to take into account, depending on what type of application you're working with, and most of all, what kind of data. But there is some of the more general points here, like when you're storing authentication data, and in this case, if you're doing username and password authentication, there is algorithms here like bcrypt or Argon2, which are now actually the recommended way of hashing the passwords, and you're never storing passwords clear text or using MD5, and not even SHA-256 or SHA-512 are not even recommended anymore. And when you're doing encryption, whether it's data in transit or at rest, using industry compliant and vetted algorithms, and when as I've written here in the don'ts, is basically don't think you can roll your own algorithms. If you look into the industry vetted algorithms, there has been a lot of very, very smart mathematicians who have been spending years on these algorithms, and it's a whole different league than us developers. So it's better pay some money for a good library that has been vetted, and also from an audit perspective, that you can show the auditors we're using industry compliant libraries. When it comes to data transfer, and especially now we are in AP driven, in the AP driven world, where we're exchanging a lot of data. implementing rate limiting and monitoring the access for the APIs. It's when we have seen a lot of those data leaks, more often than not, the bad actors find an endpoint and they can just bulk query this API and start extracting a lot of information. And by rate limiting and monitoring, you at least have a chance to discover there is an issue and plug the hole. And one of the things I really try encouraging other developers to do is try and put yourself in the place of the bad guy and say, okay, we have this system. If I were to try and get into this system or try to exfiltrate data from the system, how would we go about it? And there is a lot of good tools, open source tools, that actually can help you run tests. You know, there is like Metasploit. There's fuzzer tools from Google and Facebook have open source tools.
Yep.
And you know, you can really try and test your application and see if there is a hole.
Yep.
Also using DDoS protection services to again, this actually ties into API rate limiting, and finally on the do's list is try to limit the damage when it happens. And it's not like, oh, it might happen. At some point you will reach a situation where you have a data leak. And at least when you have put some measurements in place, you can at least try to reduce the amount of damage that happens. And you know, when we look at the don'ts, there are also people who think, oh, if I do obscurity, you know, if I obfuscate my source code or write it in a clever way, then it's security.
Yep.
No, it's not. Please don't.
Yeah. There's ways to split.
Unmaintainable then.
Yeah. And with services where you have to authenticate, I've seen a lot of examples, and up until recently, where developers like, yeah, whatever, we're just using a username and password and that's it. We really need multiple ways of authentication, whether it's, you know, one-time passwords, you know, generated from a secure source, or it's a hardware token like
Yep.
a YubiKey or a Titan 2 key from Google, smart cards. There are multiple ways, and the last thing here is, of course, some people tend to blindly expose their service on the internet without thinking about the implications. And that's where they end up on Shodan. And
that's where I get all my credit card details from.
I bet somebody one time that I could get into their Windows 2003 box that they had one-to-one port mapped to a public IP, so there was no filtration. And they're like, oh no, it's got passwords and authentication. And I said, I bet you I can get in there in under 2 minutes. And they're like, oh no way. 75 seconds later, I was in there. I had complete control over the box. And you know, you don't expose stuff to the internet.
We had someone hack one of our e-commerce web servers. They used an exploit tool. It was, by the way, I didn't set this up, but it was using Joomla, and it would have been set up by a contractor, and someone said, the server's been hacked. I sat there whilst I watched the guy who was hacking it use an exploit tool against it. And by the time we'd finished in the log, there were over 1 million entries in the log. I don't know how long he'd been hacking it, but I certainly saw the thing was just scrolling up the screen like it was on fire. You know, the people out there who are trying to exploit your systems have very. Oh, by the way, the tool was open source exploit tool as well. It's like a Metasploit tool, and he got access to Joomla. I was literally fixing and patching holes in the Joomla to get rid of him, and then in the end you have to shut down the web server. There's nothing you can do. But I said to the people, you know, you've got to keep these things patched. Oh, it's fully patched. It was 2 days ago. It's not anymore. The guy was out there. He found a server with the exploit. That was it. He was trying to get the credit card details. Luckily, you know, we'd got a nice little block between where the credit card information was and all the financial bits and where the actual web pages were. So he didn't get to that, but you know, he could have got to the admin part of it if Joomla is set up the way it normally is, which is not terribly good, I have to say, but terrifying, really. It's a war, and they're good. The enemy are good. You know, they're not
So,
cowboys. You know,
from the business implication of the cost of security, so that everybody has that to kind of roll around a little bit. A lot of times the effort you go to avoid having to do proper security, the security through obscurity, you know, the assuming that the authentication systems you have work, just because they can't get in doesn't mean they can't bring your server to its knees and cause a loss of business. The security through obscurity, the time you spend doing that could have been spent implementing a proper solution. The other thing that is super important is understanding that there's a true cost. So I sold and engineered phone systems for years, and I can tell you that I've experienced this personally. I've had colleagues and superiors that have experienced this. They get into the phone system and they immediately run up $4,000 or $5,000 worth of phone bills. And if that wasn't bad enough, in my case, they dialed Afghanistan like 1 million times. And because it was a pretty hefty system with a very large fiber pipe, they were able to fire off 4,000 phone calls in a matter of minutes.
That's why we had to rescue you from Guantanamo Bay. I didn't realize.
So, but I mean, in that case, didn't seem so bad. I mean, I reported it. It wasn't a big deal. I have to admit, it happened a second time before I learned my lesson, and they had used it to DDoS a bank's phone system. And so I started learning the painful lesson. I have, I can't speak for some superiors and colleagues. I didn't hear the exact details. I do know in one situation, a friend of mine, I had told him, hey, you need to fix this. You're going to get pantsed if you don't fix this. It's going to cost you $4,000. You got to fix it. I told him for a couple of weeks. I said, you got to fix it. You got to fix it. I kept harping on him. And the reason was he had an appliance that he was using, and it had been fine for years. Within maybe, I mean, I feel like it was within a month. It may have been within 6 months. But it got compromised. It cost him $5,200 worth of phone bills. They used it to DDoS a 911 center, which caused some issues there. Thankfully, we collected all the information. I voluntarily reported it to the cybersecurity division and told them what's going on. They worked with us, and no charges or anything were filed or anything like that. We got through it, but people don't consider the pain that comes with it. Like it's not just that they got in and they read your README file. It's that they get in. First off, you have to realize there's a constant pressure at the gate. It's not like the old days where somebody had to know the IP address and know you had the server out there. No, there's a constant pressure at the gate. You stick a Linux box online and somebody will be in that sucker within 5 minutes. Well, maybe not in it, but attacking it at that point. So there's a constant pressure at the gate. So there is no, we'll just drop the firewall for a second. Don't do it. If you need to test something like that, there are ways to do that without exposing your box. but I think that we have to acknowledge that there's the constant pressure, but we also have to acknowledge that there is a real business cost when this occurs. I mean, you lose reputations. I know restaurants have gone out of business because somebody hacked their Wi-Fi and skimmed their wireless credit card readers. I know businesses that have gone out of there's a reputation cost, there's a physical cost, there's a soft cost to the cleanup, there may be legal consequences to it. There's
Zoom and Facebook, two huge companies. Zoom really took off last year because of the pandemic. And then all of a sudden we found out that the Macintosh version was basically subverting the security, which I really disliked. And for the longest time, I refused to use Zoom because I didn't trust it. Because I think if you do those kind of sharp practices where you are overriding the operating system security controls and linking yourself in there, that's, I mean, I don't want to call it dishonest because that's just my opinion, just in case I get sued. But I think that what they did was despicable, and I would say it to their face if they were on a call with us. But I think that they did realize that what happened there when they were caught out, and also they had these security issues with people jumping onto the meetings and showing various body parts that they shouldn't and things like that, that they realized that actually they were just on the cusp of becoming a multi-billion-dollar business, that they had really launched in popularity, and all of that success could have gone like that just because they had not paid attention to the security.
Well, and even on a small business level, there's only so many times that the FBI or your local law enforcement are going to say, hey, it was innocent, you get a pass. And I had a game server that got compromised, and it was used to pump information out of the Department of Transportation and some other things. I found out while I was having coffee one morning because I got a phone call from the Air Force. Now, in that situation, I worked with them. I tried to help them get the person rather than just shut it down. But that could have been a lot worse for me. I mean, there could have been federal charges involved with that. So, and it was just a game server. I didn't care about the security because, somebody took down my Counter-Strike server. I don't care. I can put it back up in 5 seconds. But you're providing attack platforms when you do that. So anyway, sorry.
It's getting to a point here. Sorry. It's getting to a point here where if you have small business, medium business, large business, whatever, it used to be if you had a small business, you had 2 cards at the front of your Rolodex. One was to your accountant and the other one was to your lawyer.
Yep.
And then it kind of transitioned where your 3rd card was to your computer guy.
Yep.
Well, it's to a point here where everyone's so leveraged and security is becoming so specialist, he or she is becoming your 4th card. You need to have a security expert that's in your Rolodex. It doesn't mean you have to have them, in there every single day, but you should at least go through a review, figure out what your plan is for an attack before it happens. Figure out, hey, I could have turned on this log file here and had these extra events here that would really help me in the case of an attack, instead of after, oh gee, I wish I had had that. There's a lot of it's one bad guy can keep 100 good security guys busy.
The other problem is also, it's what they call the Rumsfeld paradox, because he was the guy that came up with this, and that is that many people know what they know. They know, I know this stuff. Yes. Many people know what they don't know, and it's certain stuff. I don't know how to speak French or something like that. But plenty of people don't know what they don't know. And that's the problem. I said before we started today, we were talking about some issues I had before we started streaming today, where a person who's a product owner, this person is not stupid. They're actually pretty smart, and I've got a lot of respect for them, and I work with them relatively often. But that I'm having to explain to them why they need SSL, and they're saying to me, but we don't, we don't need this or we don't need that. They just cannot get it. And the problem, they're saying to me, can you give me a shorter answer, because the answer you're giving me is too long. And I'm saying, okay, my answer is you are going to use SSL on this particular piece of product. And but we don't see why. You don't know what you don't know, and it can't reduce it down to that length of information, because the reasoning behind why you need SSL requires me to explain what HTTP and HTTPS is. The whole thing about the little what do they call them? The padlocks on the browser. They get that, but they don't understand for the first part about why an intraweb application, for example, using SSL is different from their web page that's hosted on GoDaddy, for example, and why the SSL that works on GoDaddy is not quite the same as the thing that IntraWeb app has got. And they actually also have a TMS web core app, and that is different to the way that the IntraWeb app works. And that's the problem, that some people are not going after people who, this is their specialist field. You know, I'm the IT guy, and several of you here are security experts as well. You need to trust these people. Find someone you trust, build a relationship with it, and like you say, put their name on a card. Don't second guess stuff. Go after people who actually know what they're talking about, and don't tell them I want it done this way. No, say what you want, and we'll come up with a solution.
There's a saying that I use to customers when they encounter resistance for investing in IT. Your information technology is your hardest working employee. And I actually learned this from a guy that sold network stuff, and he used to apply it to networking, but it's true of all IT. What happens when your information technology takes a sick day? I'm not talking about the person. I'm talking about what happens when your server or your switch decides it's time to give up the ghost. How much does that cost your business in downtime? Okay, well, what happens if you have an employee that decides they're going to go work for your competitor and take all your trade secrets? How much does that cost you? You have to invest in IT. It's your hardest working employee, but it is typically your lowest monetary allocation in your business. And that can't always be that way. The more you grow, the more attack surfaces you're going to have. Stay ahead of it. Anyway.
Totally agree.
And also, just to tie into with the SSL certificate, I mean, of course, it's important to get an SSL certificate from a trusted provider, so you can actually look at the chain of trust. But it's also most important that you actually do what's called SSL pinning, where you actually check the certificate, because not only is it, you know, checking, okay, I'm using HTTPS, but also check, is the certificate from the provider you actually are, you know, asking for? Because then you actually have the chance, if you're not checking and blindly trusting the certificate, you can just replace it with a self-signed, and suddenly you have broken your chain of trust, and you can actually decrypt the traffic in transit.
I had this problem with an SFTP server, where the example code said, because SFTP, for the people that don't know, is FTP over SSH. So the SSH has a certificate sent backwards and forwards to ensure that it's encrypted. And the example code that someone had copied over, on the bit that said validate certificate, on certificate validation, it said accept equals true. No other checking. It just said, yeah, thanks, I'll check that certificate. I'm like, I don't know, but that sounds like you should probably do a little bit more than just say, okay, I'm fine with that.
Did that make it through the code review?
I was reviewing it, and it did not make it through. No.
Hey, guys, something I never heard us mention on this that we probably should. If you store credentials in design time in your components, I can decompile your app and fetch those credentials. That is a
the clever people store fake credentials in their apps so that you decode it and waste a lot of time trying to get into it, going, well, it must be he's encrypted that password somehow.
I would never do something like that.
Yeah, I've done it.
There's
Go ahead.
I was going to say there's a command line utility, I think it's called strings, that's by sysinternals, that you can just run on a binary. It'll just say, here's all the strings that are embedded in there. You can look at that pretty quickly and say, oh, there's the password, and then you're in. I mean, it's a really trivial thing to do. So there's a question here. Mark's asking about dynamic scanning tools. So a lot of those scan the program when it's running. It really depends on where your application is running and how it's being used and what your application is doing. So you have to really understand your particular application and your use case. Chris mentioned Sentry components. Sentry components run in the browser. They're JavaScript that run in the browser. They may or may not actually have connection to a remote server, right? So you really have to understand the model about if your application doesn't connect to a remote server, security is not as big of a deal, right? If it's just a graphics program that does something pretty on the screen. But if you're connecting to a remote server, well, then you have to have credentials, right? Then you have to secure that connection, right? If your application's running on a remote server and being exposed over the web, well, then you have a different threat model. So you really, this goes back to that disclaimer slide I put at the beginning. We're going to give you some ideas and some suggestions here, but we're not going to give you the definitive answer for anything here. You really need to get that guy or girl or whoever it is in your Rolodex that is the expert. Now, I don't know if anybody else here is available for consulting. There probably are if you offer them enough money, but we're not trying to sell you services for sure. But you need to find somebody you trust and get with them and have a conversation and build your threat model around what your application is, how it's being used, what the data is. And if you're not collecting any data about users, that's different. If you're collecting any data about users, it better all be secured and encrypted, otherwise you're going to get in trouble. So
it's worth mentioning that Embarcadero have lists of consultants as well, and also you can go to the MVP site on the Embarcadero website and look people up. Most of the MVPs that are on there are people that are in constant contact with people like Jim, and you don't get to be an MVP if you're an absolute crook. You may do for a while, but you may slip through, but generally speaking, although they're not endorsing the services, you're probably someone who's known to Embarcadero. And certainly if you're someone like myself and Glenn and Zach and Charles, then we've cropped up a few places. So you can watch the videos and decide for yourself whether you feel that person is open and not honest. And I'm not promoting myself because I don't need any consultancy. I've got plenty of work. But Embarcadero have got that kind of ability to put you in touch with the right people. And if they don't know, they'll tell you someone who does.
Yep.
Definitely. I'm hearing Jim, but I think my video has gotten out of sync because his lips aren't moving. Oh, now you're just messing with me. So something that I did, we have somebody that's a team member now that does do some security consulting related to our apps, and then I have a third party that I submit my apps to and intentionally try to get them, hand them to them, and I say, here, try everything you can to break into this and break into the server that it hooks to. So something we did before that, though, was a lot of times there are a lot of people that are looking to test their skills, and no security consultants whatsoever will ever tell you that they know 100% of their industry, because it changes so fast. So what they can say is, based on what I know, your app is okay. But so this is why you typically use multiples. But there are students, there are people learning and wanting to hone their craft. They'll do it for free. They'll do it for an Amazon gift card. The SANS Institute, there's a gentleman over there, I don't know if he's actually still there, but Ray Davidson was one of the instructors, I think, over at the SANS Institute. And, he's given me some students to work with over the years. But a lot of times people are willing to take a shot at it. And the more people that you say, hey, try to break into this with, the higher the likelihood is you come out with a secured application. It doesn't have to be a multi-$1,000 process to at least implement security at the level that you're at. And as you grow, you build security into the budget until you can afford to bring on a CSM or a CISSP or one of these security professionals. And again, there are a lot of people that don't even have certifications that you can just tell by what they do that they can just dance right through your firewall. The password is their way of being polite. So,
talk to your local university and grow your own. grab a kid in school and mature them, invest in them, work on it, and work through it.
Well,
There's a couple of memes here I wanted to add.
Sorry, go ahead.
Security is really protecting business revenue. Okay, you already have it. How do you keep it? Okay, you have equity in brand, you have equity in your application working, you have customer equity. Security is going to protect that. What's it worth? And then the other one is good security tells you stuff you don't know as a business owner.
Yep.
And it's all about digging through the unknown, the stuff you don't have access to. All right.
No, you're fine. The shoplifters aren't coming through the front door anymore. And
Nope.
you install cameras and things to deal with break-ins. Why don't you do the same thing for your information security? I was gonna say on that same note about establishing a group, security people are typically curious about coding. Some of them are great coders, but a lot of times they want to expand their coding capability because it makes them better at their security stuff. So you can actually establish a hybrid group that is programmers and security professionals, and the amazing community things that you guys could probably do together is just awe-inspiring, and they're the kind of things that that get you jobs at Fortune 500s and whatnot. So even if you're not looking for a job, even if you're just looking for your own pieces and your own things. I mean, so yeah. Anyway, sorry, I agree with him. The shoplifters aren't coming through the front door anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and that also ties into many people think, oh, the bad guys are trying to decompile your application or doing something nefarious, but they actually start with the fact social engineering, because humans are we are the weakest link.
Yep.
And on YouTube there are several very interesting videos from different security professionals. For instance, there is a Deviant Olam who is a security professional and runs a company, and he demonstrates how they can actually get in very easily. There's also another guy, Dan Tindler, who also have a lot of great stories about how they were probing the security at high-profile companies. And when you hear the stories about how easily they got in, even though they were a high-profile company and had all the fancy security software and invested a lot in security, humans were the weakest link.
Yep. Well, and with quantum computers starting to become a bigger thing, everything that we think we know about encryption is about to change anyway. But because more horsepower means, oh look, now we got to figure out, because making the password longer anymore isn't going to work. So, but yeah.
In quantum computing, it's a scary boogeyman to crypto to a degree, but also really this is an ever evolving field. Someone said, "Oh, MD5 is not recommended anymore." It's like, yeah, MD5 was considered insecure, and I'm not trying to call you out. I'm just saying this changes a lot. As Chuck was saying, you really need to find somebody that is a specialist on this, and pay them a little bit of time every month or whatever you got to do just to make sure you're aware of what's going on in the field. Find some places that are doing news in that area and follow them. There's been a few suggestions that scrolled past that people have made, but it is changing fast, and it is becoming a bigger deal that people are not, trying to rob your store coming through the front door, as Zach mentioned.
Yeah.
Actually, it was interesting. My nephew just got into. He was trying to decide what he wanted to do for a career, and I said, "Oh, you should get in cybersecurity." And now he's pretty excited about that because it's going good. But he did a pen test for a company that used they had a keypad for getting into the building, and found out the default PIN number was the last four of your social. That is really easy to get.
Yeah.
I have another friend that's a private investigator. Guess what? You go to a private investigator, you give a picture of somebody or someone's license plate number, they can tell you what the last 4 of the social is, and then you can get in the building. So
Yep.
you really need to think about this, and you really need to get somebody that knows more about it than you do involved in the conversation.
I went to a tech school years ago that my student account was secured first name dot last name, but then my password was my last name and my birth date.
Wow.
And I'm like, you guys are a tech school. You should
We've
darn well
all
know
seen
better.
we've all seen those little surveys, where it's like,
Yeah.
find out what the best job is for you, or find out what your rock star's best meal would be, or something random like that. And it's like, okay, so you lived in what region, and where were you born, and what time you were born? Are you an Aries? Are you? Because now they've narrowed it down to a 28-day period. And then it's, your mother's maiden. We'll try and guess your mother's maiden name. You're like, blah, 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 blah. No, you're wrong. It's Wilson. Ha ha. And then, so many of those were from Cambridge Analytica, for example, was the big scandal. If you've seen the program about it, they put these questionnaires out. There were lots of, what's that personality test? Myers-Briggs. They had a lot of the
Yep.
Myers-Briggs tests, and you would go in and answer all the questions. And in amongst those questions, not the official Myers-Briggs, I hasten to add, but the type of Cambridge Analytica bad actors were asking questions that were really narrowing down who you were, so they could then work out exactly which strings to pull to make you vote or not vote in a direction that they wanted. And this is another example of attacks in ways that are non-obvious. They're gonna get information about you that you don't even know they know. And if you go to some of the websites, there are websites where you can buy information that tells you absolutely everything you didn't even know about yourself. Your bank account details, how much you spend on beer, how much cheese you do or don't like, weird, obscure things, because it's all gathered up. It's all gathered up.
I mean,
sounds paranoid. I sound like I should be putting tinfoil hat on, but
Well, and one of the things that people forget is they're like, well, okay, well, if they guess my password 3 times, they get banned. Except for what a lot of these places are doing is they're buying information packs, like Ian was saying, and then they've got a known username password combo, and they're trying them on other sites. So if you use the same password on every single site, the moment that they compromised your whatever account, your awesomechess.com or whatever, okay, yeah, you're just playing chess on it, and so you may not have thought 2 things about it, but the moment that password was leaked, they're trying it at Bank of America, they're trying it at Fifth Third, Amazon, eBay, any place they can, PayPal.
There are tools already to do that. You
Yeah.
put in a contact information and part of a password, and it will go ahead and try adding 1, 2, 3, 4 at the end of each one, and then it'll try against every website to see if they can find variants of your username on them. So at least they'll bring back the intelligence. Hey, this user exists here, 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 and here, and then it will try against different variants of a password to hit it. So just changing the last 2 digits won't fix it either. But you compound that with.
If I was the CTO of 1Password, the password tool, I would not be able to sleep at night. Any of these password managers, especially the ones that sit on your browser toolbar like that and intercept all your web pages, I would be extremely concerned that one day that's going to be compromised. And when that's compromised, I'm really in trouble, because I've got lots of 2-factor authentication stuff in there. Password. I mean, you should be using a password manager. If you're not, then well,
Ubiquity.
And
you're writing stuff down, are you?
When you combine that with, like, the state of California and a couple other states got called out for selling their entire DMV roles to third-party data marketing companies, including the biometric data that they collected.
Nice. Yeah.
That's where you start getting into more of the issues that come up. So, keeping an eye out on not just what data are you a custodian of, what data are you peripherally connected to, but also third parties that are involved with the data that's being gathered from folks you give it to.
The ubiquity attack, and
Mhm.
again, I may be incorrect in this, so everybody's gonna need to look that up on their own. But last I knew, I think it was like LastPass, and somebody had stored basically like a God credential in LastPass, and their LastPass account got compromised, I believe was what I read about that. Now, again, I don't know if, because those kind of things, there's a lot of disinformation and stuff, and it's possible that I skimmed quick and didn't catch it. So I may be wrong in what I just said, but the gist of what I had heard was that they had compromised a technician's LastPass and they had a God credential.
Exactly. That's part of it. And the second part of this breach is that
Yep.
they,
Everybody's got an axe to grind.
yeah, and part of also is that they didn't have control over their audits, so they took them some time for them to actually figure out, hey, we have people in the system we don't want to have, and they have injected backdoors. So and also by the statements that have been put out, there are still no clear identification of, how much have been compromised.
Yeah.
Yep.
I wasn't too
Here's
worried in my case. I have a SEM solution that sits in the way anyway, but
Right.
There is
There
an
was a
interesting
good one with the
question
solar-
here.
I'm sorry, there's a good one with the SolarWinds piece where folks were logging in as administrator into different parts of the Azure cloud, but the way they're tracking that there was a compromise was admins were logging in and there wasn't a log entry for 2FA, meaning when they actually presented their login credential to Azure, they were passing a token that didn't expire or roll over. So that was one of the critical ways how they figured out that some of these credentials were compromised, was by missing log entries. So the process you had to do is write a program that went through the log file and say, okay, tick, 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 okay, here's a admin login. Look in the next 2 or 3 entries for a 2FA authentication transaction. And if there wasn't one, you knew they had forged the token in the one before it. So it's getting really, really dynamic on figuring out how to track these things, not just positive log entries, but absence of a log entry can show you a compromise depending on what situation you're in.
The somebody asked what's the best way to protect a God password, and I know some people might disagree, but there should never be one, ever. Right. I gotta ask, I guess, and maybe I'm not thinking of corner cases here, but what is it that you think you're not going to be able to get back into if you don't have a God password? Because if you belong in that system, you have access to the back end of the database more than likely. So if it's a credential to get you into the database, well, you can get in there anyway. As much as you don't want that capability, there's very little you can do to stop somebody from taking over the root of a database. If they're that far in, they've got it. I'm sorry, they just do. The trick should be never to let the bad actors that far in the first place. But I'm confused as to what the objective of the God password would be. Like, why would you do that? And go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say. What's that, Chuck?
Everything else broken, and you can't get in because the fancy authentication system you set up doesn't work, and you need a token to get back in. That's a one-time use. That's the only case I can think of to have one. And even then, are you sure you really need it? I mean, if you want something truly secret, keep it away from a computer.
Yeah, I mean, I know some of our clients are in the nuclear security industry, and they have nuclear safeguards that are their books that are stashed in a special secured safe. I mean, yeah, I mean, you could put recovery codes in some situation like that, but I mean, and honestly, I'm probably being very narrow-minded, and I'm not going to say that I've never written a God password. I've done that. Okay, everybody has, but it may, yeah, maybe I'm being really narrow-minded, that thinking that there should never be one, but I encourage people to challenge me on circumstances for God passwords, because I really would like the thought exercise on that, because. Yeah, somebody wrote in here that LastPass requires a God password.
I think what he's saying is the master password, right? So the master password, there's two different concepts going on here, right? So there is like the issue that had on Twitter a while back where all those accounts were compromised, and that was because it turns out Twitter had the ability for somebody to go in and take over anybody's account. That shouldn't exist.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was abused. And so that's a God password. A God password is where if the end user has this credential, they could then access everything in your system, right? That's bad, right? The ability for, if you're a password manager, for the ability for one person to be able to read everybody's secured passwords should never happen, right? Now,
right.
you having a master password that secures all of your passwords, right? You're maintaining that. It should be, mine's, I want to say 20 something characters long, mixture of letters and numbers. Write it down and keep that secured someplace for you. If somebody's physically got access to your house, they're probably going to torture out of you. Okay. So writing it down is probably not a big deal. Again, depends on your threat model. But
I feel like if somebody's going to put a God password, and somebody wrote in there, it should be split between two people.
I just answered that and said, "Oh, that's like the nuclear keys."
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. The nuclear keys.
Yeah. Have we not watched War Games? What's up with you?
The last one I did was using a open, and I'm going to plug a company here, but it's an open source piece. But I did a Hashi vault that took 5 key shards that you separated between 5 people, and you had to have 3 of them present to unlock the vault.
I've seen that movie. Isn't that Raiders of the Lost Ark?
No, it was reality, and it's an open source product by them. It's HashiCorp Vault. Now their Vault product is really expensive, but that kind of thing exists where you can have key shards that are like 3 of 5 or some other pieces that you don't have to have all 3, because if one guy leaves, where is it? But get a majority of the key shards together to make it work, and it doesn't have to be the exact 3. So I thought that was a really cool.
That's a bit like GitHub's access backup key. They have like some numbers that you can type in the access backup. And the idea is that you split them up and give them to people that need them. But the problem with that is that each one person has got full ability to access your account. So really what you need is, 2 or 3 lots of keys that you give out to various people, so that if you get hit by a bus, because I get asked that question all the time, what happens if you die, Ian? Which is a bit worrying, because I'm starting to worry that maybe they're trying to get out paying the bill. But that would be a better solution. So you've got those backup passwords that override the 2-factor authentication, but in order to use it, it's got to be from 2 different locations or 2 methods. And I think that's kind of what you're saying, Charles.
HashiCorp is a really neat corporation. I got to hang with those guys when I was at FinTech in Singapore.
Cool.
A couple of years back, and they I think they were actually pretty small back then, but yeah, they have some neat solutions. We've been using recently AWS Cognito to handle some of our user kind of credential management stuff.
That's great. That's a great solution too.
Yep.
So there's a question here that I thought was kind of interesting, actually. What is the best way, if you have some secret information that you need to deploy in your application? How do you secure that, right? So whatever it might be, if you have to deploy a secret in your Windows binary. What's that?
So
API key, for instance.
Yep. So I actually, and honestly, I want to preface this by saying the moment that you do get it out to use it, somebody can technically breach and get it. But there are situations, and I don't like them, and I actively work against them. And I think we've got all but one eradicated at this point. But where there is a piece of information that is stored, and what I did was I stored it in multiple places, broke it up, encrypted it, encoded it, and had it done in a way that somebody's going to have to go through a lot of effort. But that's again security through obscurity in some ways. It's not a great way to do it, and in my opinion, not sustainable. And all it takes is it can raise havoc, because if you get a little bit of corruption in there, you're toast. Your program's no longer going to work right. So I mean, it's just it's tough, because I know as programmers sometimes we're left with literally what feels like no choice, especially if you're dealing with an application that has online offline support. That becomes even more complicated. We have that a lot with the stuff that goes to Africa. We have to be able to cache all that information, because it may be 2 weeks before they appear at a hospital again to be able to sync back up. So
Absolutely, it really depends on a lot of factors. I mean, how much security do you need to go through for that secret, right?
yeah, well, but even then, you're just talking about methods and reverse engineering of those
So,
methods.
and right sizing that is something that really, yep, exactly.
There was also a good question here about how the best way to secure your C++ application against reverse engineering. And I would actually say there is no best way, because I have always worked by the mantra: if you can run it, you can break it. I mean, sure, you can pay a lot of money for different solutions that pack your exe file and reroute the entry point, then implement anti-debugging features, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, when the exe file runs with this loader, the unencrypted code, the unpacked code, is in memory. And when you know your way around, you can go in, dump that piece of memory, and you can go in and reconstruct the entry point in the exe file and actually run it. And
it's like having a locked door, and you put the key in the door to unlock the door. You don't see the guy behind you, and as you open the door, he pushes you in, and he's inside your building. Yes. So at that point, you've got to open the door to get in through it, so the guy can follow you through. And if your program can open that lock, then someone can follow through how you open the lock, go in behind you and break it. And that of course, is what happens.
Yeah, well, and I want to stress, this is not specific to C++ or Delphi.
Right.
If you write a computer program, the whole point of a computer program is it is a set of interpretable instructions that the computer or the processor, microcontroller, whatever, executes. So, I mean, this is not specific to Delphi. I face the same threat on the microcontrollers and firmware that I write. I mean,
I used to work in a company where we used to write EPROMs, and I'm talking like 1980s, probably very early 1980s. My father, who's dead now, but there you go. And we used to program the EPROMs, and some of them were for satellites. And they would have the EPROMs in there. You can write the programs down, but eventually there's a little button that you press, and it cuts a fuse inside the EPROM. And then after that, in theory, you can't change the program on the EPROM. Because it's physically, that device then is broken for writing. And if you need to overwrite it again, unfortunately, you've got to get another EPROM and put the program back in again and carry on. And that's probably one of the more secure ways of delivering your software. It doesn't mean to say they can't try and read it out of it, because the physical hardware, the way that hardware works, doesn't provide for the ability to read the microcode. What it does do is allow you to run that EPROM and then reverse engineer it, which is of course how people like Compaq broke the was it Compaq or whoever broke the BIOSes back in the day of IBM compatibles. But it does mean that they can't look at certain passwords, for example. All they can do is, if they saw a key coming down and it's a private public key algorithm, with that hardware, you're stuck. there's nothing you can do, because
Well,
all that happens is that EEPROM or that programmable chip or whatever. And I think this is how Apple's onboard security works. It's not something that you can break. If you try and take it to pieces, it destroys it. And so it's obfuscation by actual physical protection. If you try and look at it, and this is what the quantum computing is all about. When you send signals along with it on certain types of quantum types of entanglement, which is what they're proposing, the mere act of looking at it actually interferes with the quantum entanglement, and so therefore you can't even examine what's going on without the other end going, wait a minute, our signal's broken. And that will be obviously the golden key, I suppose, in the future. But
well, and
the hardware, that was in the 1980s. You could make it so it's secure. You can't do it now because it's nearly all software.
And there are microcontrollers that you can put cryptographic interfaces on. Some of them have built-ins. Some of them, like I know Atmel used to make Cypress. One of them used to make a separate chip that would handle the encryption for your program that's loaded. But I've also seen where people have managed to step around stuff like that. And really, you have to consider what the value of stepping around it is. I mean, if you're talking about bypassing the security on your coffee maker, people aren't going to spend tens of thousands of dollars to do that. If you're talking about bypassing
buy a new one
security,
for $12.
Huh?
Buy a new one for $12.
Yeah, exactly. It would take you less time to go through and replace the chip with your own code. But but if you're talking about security on something more mission critical, like say a license plate camera or or even an RFID reader or a biometric scanner or things along the way that I hate to bring up, but launch mechanisms, things like that. Those security concerns, people invest money in those. People have no qualms about having an entire data center dedicated to breaking that.
Whole governments spend money trying to break those things. Look at the Iranian the deep nuclear facility that they've only just said was breached, and they said, oh, it's Israel, it's Israel. Now, we don't know, and we probably never will know for sure exactly who did it. That thing's buried under the ground. It's got all sorts of security on it, and yet they managed to damage it. So,
well,
I don't think the Iranians are stupid. I think they're actually fairly sophisticated. I mean, they are allegedly launching all sorts of quite sophisticated cyber attacks. But as you say, there are whole countries putting their resources into breaching you.
That happened not once for them, but twice.
I know, right?
The same thing.
I want to go back to Glenn was talking about preventing reverse engineering of your desktop application. Glenn, did you? I feel like you got cut off before you got to where you were going with that.
Yeah. Sorry, man.
Yeah. I mean, of course, there are tools that also can obfuscate the source code before it's being compiled, which, when you look from a reverse engineering perspective, can help make things harder to figure out. But it's also, there are some programming languages which are extremely easy to take apart and create an almost one-to-one replication. C#, for instance, if you don't turn off obfuscation and other mechanisms, a standard C# application can be taken apart very easily.
Well, in fact, any of the .NET languages, they're actually designed to be that way, so that you can flip into, now see this in Visual Basic .NET instead of C#. There are tools that will actually do that, which is slightly bizarre. It's because of the IL, the intermediate.
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, there is no holy grail for protecting your application. I mean, if you're creating a product and you're offering a trial version, I would rather say build a separate executable with only the trial features built in. And that means offer the full product. And I mean, there's even some vendors that use a hardware token as a way of authenticating your license. But again, it's been shown that they are able to create a virtual token that emulates a hardware token.
We actually used to use a USB. Originally, it was a parallel dongle.
Yep.
And I forget who it's from.
Aladdin,
Aladdin, yes, Aladdin.
Yeah.
That's right. And they had an envelope that enveloped the application and encrypted it. And we used that, and we used to use another one that was it then changed to a USB thing because people stopped having parallel ports. Had a real-time clock built in, which was very useful for time and attendance because it meant that the real-time clock, when people clocked in or out, because that's what time and attendance was doing, we would get the time from the dongle, not from the time on the computer. When some clever little so-and-so goes, I'll just change the time. Oh, look, I'm not late now. Yeah, well, bad luck. Unfortunately, we anticipate you do that, and we get the time from the dongle, and you are late, and you're in trouble, maybe even fired. But actually, we stopped doing that because there were drivers that were written that were signed as well, code signing, which is one of the things we were going to talk about. They were signed, and the hardware dongle was cracked, and people would be having a legitimate dongle once. They cracked the hardware token, and that was it. Off they went, and they didn't need the hardware token anymore. So it was a bit of a problem.
Autodesk.
Yeah, Autodesk, all sorts of.
Oh, they all have. Hasp keys. That's another name for it. Somebody wrote hasp keys. And somebody,
yes, that's the one. Time hasp was the one we used to use.
Yeah. So
we actually, for our trial versions, we actually used Delphi compiler conditional compilation. So for the lower version, we compile it with one set of conditional defines. The middle version, we use another set of defines, and then if you order it, you can temporarily have some slightly enhanced features, but not the full set. So you can upgrade, so you get that, but then we will send through an upgrade once you've paid the bill. So, but you cannot physically jump over some blocking code that we've got in our code by decompiling it and going, I'll put a jump instruction in the bit that checks whether your license is, the full singing and dancing version or not, because the code simply isn't there. The conditional define completely eradicates that. That's how we do it, and that's the only way I know that, because I had a misspent youth like most people. I used to, visit machines back in the Unix days and in the 80s. And
what about how to secure? You're connecting to a remote database. Of course, the big exploit there is SQL injection attacks. How can you make sure your program is secure from SQL injection attacks, and how can you, or what are best practices in developing a program for that, and then how can you validate it and verify that you don't have any SQL injection attacks?
Well, the first thing I think, I don't know what the other guys have got an opinion on, but the first thing is don't roll your own database stuff. Use someone else's, and particularly some well-used components out there that have already gone through that loop of making sure things are encrypted and are hardened. Secondly, everything you get from SQL, assume that it's corrupt and that in some way it's got something in there like drop tables in the, the classic SQL injection is to put semicolon, drop tables, and then something else, a comment. And you can find websites out there, extremely popular ones, that get breached by someone doing as simple as that, just going into a text edit box. Instead of putting their full name, they put a drop tables statement, cleverly crafted. So you have to assume that whatever you're going to write back into that database is likely to cause a problem. So you've got to sanitize it, and either use the built-in techniques that come with FireDAC and all those other components, or write your own to make sure that you are getting rid of things like semicolons and slashes and things like that shouldn't be there. And the other thing you can do, of course, is actually encrypt information that you store, so that what you store back into the table is encrypted, so it can't possibly execute because it's encrypted, information. You can't put a SQL injection in something if you encrypt it first and then write it into your table. It's a very simple thing to do, but all of a sudden, these people can't put some SQL injection. It's only when you're writing plain text quite often that in your query you've got some dynamic query, and you've got a parameterized query with this colon in and some variable. You pass in unsanitized information that's come straight from an edit box or something like that. You put it into your parameterized query, run the query, and where's all my tables gone? Well, you should have sanitized it first. FireDAC has got properties to prevent that, and you should be checking it anyway.
And at each release, double check with a professional and have them try to break in, to think of things you haven't thought of yourself. And that's a good thing for two reasons. One is you get the education and you figure it out privately without someone else finding it out for you. And then two, you get a certain amount of liability protection from that if you have a customer that has an issue.
Yeah.
So you can say, yes, I did do my due diligence. I did hire a professional to look at this. And you do that, once a big release or once a quarter or whatever it is on your business case that makes sense for you.
Now, I want to clarify that hiring a professional is not what we talked about earlier, where you buy somebody a $20 Amazon gift card if they can get in.
Correct.
That's not the same methodology.
Fiverr.com. For $5, I will test your site.
But
here's a picture of me testing your site.
It did dawn on me. The third party that we use, if somebody's really desperate to find a third party to test their app, and I'm not saying that from the aspect that they're not a good third party. It's just I prefer not to give up my resources. But if you're really desperate, you can email me, and I would probably be willing to pass their contact info along. But there are tons of people out there that do do this kind of thing. My advice is find one that you can work with if you can in your local area, just because it's a little easier for them to show you how they got in sometimes. And they also can participate a little bit. Like my third party guy will actually social engineer. So he will call up and try to convince the front desk operator to let him through. He showed up to a client one time wearing just a tool belt, and I think he had taken a random sticker off a drink bottle and stuck it on his chest and claimed he was with the phone company, and they let him right into the IT closet. And I was just like, you gotta be kidding me. So, we joke about it.
There's a saying, just because you're paranoid, it doesn't mean that they're not out to get you.
Well,
and it's a fact.
And you see it in movies, and I think people think it's a joke in movies that, if you behave like you belong there, people will leave you alone. That's not a joke. If you behave like you belong there, a lot of times they won't question you. And if you behave like you're in charge, most people fall in line. They just have a habit of doing it. There's
those people that walked up to the White House dinner that time. Do you remember that couple? They just turned up, and everybody just assumed that they were on the guest list because they looked the part, they were dressed the part, and they knew the right people. And okay, you go. Who are you with, Miss and Mrs. So-and-so over there? That was the biggest failing of security ever, and I'm sure plenty of people got fired that day. But it just goes to show, even some of the locations where there are a lot of paranoid people with their fingers in their ears and little curly earpieces down, doesn't mean to say that it doesn't happen.
Oh yeah,
this has been a really fascinating conversation, and I've learned a lot, and I've feedback from a few people that they've enjoyed this quite a bit as well. I do want to go around the table, as it were, and see if anybody has any closing remarks. I feel like some people may not have got much chance to say as much as they'd like to. So I'm going to start with Glenn real quick and see if you have any closing remarks before we finish up here.
Code signing certificates are very cheap today. So sign all your executables or DLLs you're distributing with your application. And also, when you're developing an application that uses database transaction, never ever expose the database directly over the internet. You create a REST service that sits in between your database and your end user application. And as I mentioned earlier, do API rate limiting, check how is it being accessed. And that way you can also sanitize the input and ensure that when bad guys are hammering your system, you at least have some form of defense.
Yep.
In fact, I've just put a link up there to a blog post all about code signing. It's one of the ones that's most popular on my website. Tells you all about what code signing is if you don't know, how to do it, and some of the pitfalls of it.
Great. Awesome. So I'll go ahead and let you go. And Ian, anything, closing comments, remarks?
No, I mean, as usual, I always talk far too much. So I think I've said everything I need to say. I mean, we're all in it together. Just because we're here as experts, it doesn't mean to say we get everything right. And we don't know everything. And that's why there's a group of us, not just one of us who's got all the answers. At the end of the day, just assume that people are trying to hack your site, break your software, pirate what you've got. Don't trust anything. I know it sounds paranoid, but it's unfortunately a reality of how today's society is. Full stop.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and really, a couple of comments in here, I mentioned that you really need to understand your threat model, right? What is it you're securing, and who is likely to be trying to break it? And that will dictate how paranoid you should be.
It's not always obvious why either, because sometimes you may be the stepping stone to get to someone else. We've had people try and break some of our web servers to get to a different web server, but look like it's us.
Yep.
You know.
SolarWinds is a great example of that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, SolarWinds.
Believe me, I've taken up my own plenty of oxygen already. We can go ahead and defer to somebody else here.
Chuck, any closing comments, remarks? Oh, I do have another slide actually. Let me bring this up while you're sharing that. I will share the slides out as well to everybody as a replay. So Chuck, any closing remarks?
Yeah, you're not alone. Nobody knows everything. Everybody needs help. Reach out and ask for it. There's always somebody smarter. Find them, buy them coffee, soda, bagel, whatever you can do. I think Zero Trust is something to look at. These links here are some really good bedtime reading, but they're good to know about. Understand what a CVE is. If you don't know it, Google it and take a look at those and get subscribed to it. There's a lot of vocabulary in security that doesn't match everything else. It's about protecting the things and protecting, each other, revenue, everything else. Trust a secure source of your install for your servers, and trust your data and trust your code. Don't trust anything else. Rebuild your servers early and often. Batch them early and often. Build automated processes that if somebody gets in and breaks your web server, blow it away and rebuild it. Don't worry about trying to fix it. Just replace it. So you'll save a lot more time with that, with the secure DevOps and that kind of stuff. Try to work on getting better. It's not going to happen in one day, but if you put your mind to it, there's a lot you can do, just a little bit every day, and just try to stay encouraged and reach out to other folks to help out.
Yeah.
So there's
I would quickly add to your point with rebuild servers often. If you're rebuilding servers often, you're at the same time testing your disaster recovery plan.
Yeah, I was about to say, have a disaster recovery plan and have a data breach plan. I know it seems terrible, and like especially in the case of a data breach plan, you hope you'd never have to use it. But I do know that large organizations, hospitals, and nonprofits even they have to have these things these days. It's becoming a requirement of your cybersecurity insurance, and that's an actual thing now. So I'm fearful that at some point as developers we're going to have to become heavily bonded in order to be able to start producing applications because of the liability that floats around sometimes. So anyway,
I wish more server admins were programmers.
Yeah.
So
I think it's funny Jim shaved his beard off, by the way, because you notice that everybody else isn't clean shaven. When you said sysadmin, I immediately thought of a guy with a long beard.
I was going to say,
that's like the beard he had.
I used to, I think Jim saw me maybe a week ago. I think Glenn did too. But I used to have a full beard going on for a while here, and I got rid of it. Had to rejoin society, you know.
Yeah.
Mine doesn't show up on camera very well.
So there was a few comments here, and I agree. A few people saying that that this is great and they'd like to see more, and I agree. I feel like there's a few really important concepts that we'd like Glenn said, code signing. I'm like, oh, that was like the one thing I wanted to make sure we covered, and we just added it at the end. So I'm going to, and actually I'm looking here at the list and I'm seeing some MVPs. I'm like, oh, why didn't I invite them to be? Oh my goodness, I should. Oh, so anyway, I will make a slide deck and invite those of you who are here to create. We'll work on making a more structured presentation on security to share that is less of conversational and more of a here is some things to think about and consider and resources and stuff, and more focused to get through things and make that available to you in the near future. So stay tuned for that, and yeah, great stuff. So thanks for being part of this Tea, Coffee, and Code session.
Thanks, Jim.
This is a new series, and we see you all around.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Bye.
coming. We enjoyed it.
Bye.